people, welcome back to my YouTube channel. It has been a hot minute since I've done a video, and today's one has definitely been a long time coming. I'm still a little bit sick, so sorry if my voice is a bit funny and whatever, but I'm just gonna jump straight into it. So today is my top 10 tips for growing your booty. So there are 10 main things that I want to talk about today. 10 things that I think are super important if you do want to grow your glutes. Pretty much important for growing any muscle really, but this is what's worked for me, and also based on like the scientific research that I've done myself. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is nutrition. Your glutes are arguably the largest muscle group in your body, so they need to be fed. They're a large muscle group. You need to work them, you need to be able to fuel them, and you need to feed them in order for them to recover and grow. So I wouldn't recommend trying to build your glutes in a calorie deficit. I would at least recommend to be eating at a maintenance level or even like a small surplus, just so that you can really, one, fuel your workouts with that extra food, because a lot of what I recommend for growing your glutes is heavy lifting, so that requires a lot of energy and a lot of fuel, and also so that you can recover from your workouts. And another really important thing is getting enough protein. Trying to grow your glutes, protein is the building block of muscle, so you're not going to grow any of your muscles without enough protein. Otherwise your body is going to be in a catabolic state, meaning it is eating away at its own muscle basically. If it's not getting enough protein or not getting enough food, it starts eating away at its own muscle. So getting enough protein. If you don't actually know how to figure out how much protein you need or you should be eating, or how to work out your macros, I will potentially do a video about that in the future, but otherwise in the meantime, feel free to send me a DM on Instagram, or there are plenty of websites as well if you Google how to find out your macros or that kind of thing. So nutrition is the first thing, and definitely one of the most important. I've always, whenever I've been growing my glutes, I have been eating enough food to do so. And another good thing about that is you might feel a little bit fluffy in the meantime while you're growing your glutes, but they actually look bigger because, well, for me at least, I know like a lot of girls, we hold our body fat around like your thighs and your bum. So those extra calories, not only do they help you through your workouts and everything, they also make your glutes look fuller and like peachier. But then if you do decide to cut afterwards and you lose a bit of that body fat, that's when you sort of reveal the muscle and everything underneath. Tip number 2 for growing your glutes is understanding the anatomy of the glutes. I think this is really important to know exactly what you're training. So there are 3 main muscles that make up your gluteals. You've got your glute maximus, which is the largest muscle, and that makes up most of your glute size. You've got your glute med, which is about half the size of your glute max, but equally as important to grow and shape the booty. And then you've got your glute min, which is sort of a much smaller muscle that doesn't have as much part to play in terms of size and movement. It's kind of a little bit more of like a stabilizer, and it's a very deep muscle, so it's not so much like what we can see to the eye. So to sort of help you understand that, this here, the bigger part of your glute, that is the glute max, right? So that's most of your size there. This side bit here that you can see like wraps around the top there, that's your glute med. So it's kind of like a little bit more on the side, and it kind of creates more of like the booty shelf, that part there. I don't know if you can see that. And then the glute min is obviously a lot deeper underneath, so you can't actually see it. So I think that's just important to understand exactly where the muscles are and why you're training them the certain way. Like the glute makeup helps you understand why you do certain exercises, so you don't just think I'm doing a squat because I've heard that grows the glutes, but it's actually understanding why. So as part of the anatomy, that kind of ties into like your movements, what the glutes movements actually are in the body. So you've got hip extension, that is one of your main movements. You've got internal and external rotation of the hip, so hip rotation, and you've got hip abduction, which is moving your leg like away from your body, extension, rotation, abduction, and stabilization, obviously. Tip number 3 and tip number 4 kind of tie in together. So tip number 3 is recovery and tip number 4 is frequency. So for number 3, recovery, you need to allow your glutes time to recover between sessions. You don't want to be smashing them every single day. Especially if you're a beginner, you're gonna get sore. So you're not gonna be able to hit your glutes every day. So you need to allow your glutes time to recover in between each session. Just like any other muscle group, it needs time to rest and recover. And that time where you're resting is when a lot of your growth is happening. So when you're actually working out, that's when you're tearing the muscle fibers apart and breaking them down. And then in between sessions, when you're resting and you're feeding the muscles, that's when they're actually building back up, coming back stronger and recovering. So that rest time is really important. But that tying into tip number 4 is frequency. So this kind of is very different for everybody. I like to train glutes 2 to 3 times a week. If you're a beginner, that might be too much because you might be too sore. You might only be able to train twice a week, like once at maybe the beginning and once at sort of the end, mid to end of the week. If you're more advanced like me, I could probably train glutes every day and it wouldn't, I mean not every day, but like I would be able to do it, but I probably wouldn't get much benefit out of doing that because I wouldn't be allowing my body time to recover, so it wouldn't be beneficial. So I recommend anywhere from 2 to 4 times a week. At the moment, I'm training 2 to 3 times a week, 3 if I can, if I have enough time, because obviously the glutes are a larger muscle group, so I don't like to just sort of get in and get out when I'm training glutes. It's quite a specific training session for me. So frequency can depend on your goal, where you're at, if you're a beginner or if you're an advanced person. Your genetics as well. Some girls naturally have good glutes already, and they may not need to hit them as often. They might already have like a really good shape, so you know they don't need to put in so much more work like other people, whereas some people might have that really sort of flat, more pancake type bum naturally, unfortunately, which means they may require a lot more extra work, which means more frequency. Tip number 5 today is cues. So you might hear a bit about this on Instagram, or if you've ever done a session with a personal trainer and they're sort of yelling things at you as you're training, this is cues. Really important for helping with your form and just making sure that you're performing the exercise correctly for the most sort of like benefit with your glutes. So for example, in a squat, it's really important when you're squatting to make sure you're pushing through your heels. You'll hear people saying, push through your heels, drive your knees out, squeeze from your glutes, like all those things are super, super important. And again, these tie into a few of the other tips that I have coming, such as like mind to muscle connection and stuff like that. But performing a squat, you don't want to be on your toes. Like we're already quad dominant people, and pushing through your heels is helping you to engage your glutes and keeping the load over the muscle you're trying to work. So trying to use your posterior chain, meaning like your glutes, your hamstrings, to push the bar back up rather than sort of being forward on your toes and relying more on your quads or letting your quads take over. So pushing through your heels is something that we say as personal trainers all the time, especially in a squat or a deadlift. Super, super important. Driving your knees out is another one that is really important as a cue as well. Again, especially in a squat, deadlift, hip thrust, really important. If your knees are caving in, which is very, very common, especially for beginners, it usually means that you have a weak glute med. and that is the main muscle that does your hip abduction. So like I said, moving your leg like away from your body, that's a hip abduction. So of course, naturally, when that's under load, if it's not strong, your knees cave in, but you need to build your glute med to keep driving your knees out. That's important not only for like safety and preventing injuries, but also for making sure that your glutes are well-rounded and balanced in terms of strength and like the physical appearance as well. So driving your knees out, it does take practice. Don't be upset that your knees keep caving in. It might just mean dropping the weight down a little bit to be able to focus on driving your knees out and keeping them sort of like in line with your toes. And that's another thing, pointing your toes outwards and having a wider stance is usually going to help engage your glutes more. So like a sumo stance, if you've got a really narrow stance in a squat, usually that's more of a quad focused setup. Stepping your feet sort of just outside of like shoulder width, that's more of like a sumo squat. I always do that whenever I'm squatting, no matter what, unless I'm specifically training on a quad day, then I might do like a narrow stance. But sumo stance for your squat is going to help engage your glutes even more and just prevent your quads from taking over. If you are in that sumo stance, tilting your toes slightly out, like pointing them just outside of like facing forward, and then your knees should be tracking over your toes in that outwards direction, so keeping your knees out. Squeezing your glutes, thinking about squeezing your glutes. So driving up through your heels, keeping your knees out, squeezing your glutes through the movement. So you're actually thinking about using your glutes to perform that movement, which leads me to number 6, which is mind to muscle connection. Super, super important as well for growing any muscle, especially your glutes. You really need to be mindful of the muscle that you're trying to work. And like I said, most of us are quad dominant. It is very, very common in our society. A lot of the reason for this is because we are always moving forward. We don't walk backwards, we're always walking forward. And another thing is, like, you know, if you're sitting at a desk and you're always sitting and your legs are always bent, then you get like tight hip flexors and that kind of thing. A lot of us are just very quad dominant people. So that's just kind of naturally going to happen, which means that you may find it really hard to feel a movement in your glutes. I still do sometimes. It was worse when I started, but I've obviously done a lot of work on that over the years, trying to work on my mind to muscle connection and really think about engaging the muscle that I'm trying to work, which in this case is the glutes. So it just comes down to practice and really focusing and thinking about it. Don't be at the gym sort of on your phone, just going through the motions. You need to think about the muscle, and that's why they call it a mind to muscle connection, because you want to have such a strong mind to muscle connection that like you can really feel the movement, you can feel the muscle working. You can sort of activate that muscle without weight or anything like that. Like you can just sort of tense it and feel it. So that's really important as well for growing your glutes, because otherwise your quads are likely to take over. And they probably, when you're starting out, it is hard. Your quads are going to try and take over, especially in movements like your squat, maybe even in a hip thrust if you're a quad dominant person. So you need to really focus on the muscle and think about the muscle that you're trying to work. This also ties into tip number 7, I think, which is glute activation. Another super important thing, this changed the game for me. Like, I was doing glute workouts before, but not really feeling it, not really getting much results or whatever. And then that's when I learned about glute activation. So what that means is warming up your glutes before you actually train them. So warming up is always important, but specifically warming up the muscle that you're about to use, and activating it, meaning waking it up, turning it on, stimulating it, getting it ready to actually do the work. Especially if you are quite sedentary, you have, say, a desk job, you're sitting all day on your glutes, and they just switch off. You come to the gym and you might, you know, do 5 minutes on the treadmill to warm up and then go, all right, I'm ready to squat. Your glutes still aren't awake. When you jumped on the treadmill to warm up, you're moving forward, your quads are working, not so much your glutes. So yeah, there'll be blood pumping around your body and you might feel warm, but your glutes are still switched off. So super important to switch them on, wake them up, get them ready to work. I always recommend at least 15 minutes of glute activation work before you start. So an example of what I would do would be I might do like a 5-minute sort of cardio based warm up to get the blood pumping. If I am doing a leg day, usually I would jump on this stair machine to help warm up my glutes a little bit more, and then I usually do glute activation with a band. You don't have to use a band. If you don't have a band, you can do it without a band, that doesn't matter. But going through the movements that you're going to do with weight, but doing them say at body weight or with a band. So I'll do some body weight squats or banded squats, slow the movement right down, really slow, eccentric, squeezing up with your glutes and squeezing at the top. Same with like a glute bridge. I'll do glute bridges before I do my workout. Especially banded gets like a really good burn and it helps you really feel that your glutes are turning on. Doing frog pumps, doing hip abduction movements, so that you're waking up your glute med as well. Don't just focus on activating your glute max. You want to make sure you're doing those lateral abduction movements as well to wake up your glute med. Just usually say like, I don't know, 3 sets of 15 reps of a few different exercises. So like a squat, a glute bridge, a frog pump, a hip abduction, and a glute kickback. That's 5 exercises. Do them like 2 to 3 times of 15 reps each leg. And by that point, you should be super warm. You should be able to feel your glutes. You might even be getting a burn already. And that can also be used as a glute finisher at the end as well, if you just want to sort of get that extra glute burn or finisher at the end of your workout. Tip number 8 for growing your glutes is the different load vectors. So this is getting a little bit more scientific. So you have different load vectors, and that kind of helps hit your glutes from all different angles and directions, I guess. So you've got vertical loading, horizontal loading, and lateral loading as a sort of basic 3. It does get a little bit more in depth and complicated than that, but I'm just going to stick to those 3 to help you understand. So vertical loading would be your squats, deadlifts, Romanian deadlifts, because you're upright and the load is either on your back or like in a deadlift, the bar's in front of you, but you're upright. So you're moving in that vertical plane, which is like up and down. Horizontal loading would be your hip thrust, glute bridge, because you're like this and the weight is in that horizontal movement. So you've got vertical and then horizontal. A glute kickback as well would be horizontal, because even though you're like this, the actual load, you're kicking back this way. So that's, I hope that kind of helps you understand. Lateral vector would be all your abduction movements. So if you do anything banded where you're moving your glutes in a lateral way, a cable abduction or a lateral walk with a band, or like crab walks, that kind of thing, like they're all lateral. So you can combine these together and that is going to be even more effective. So if you do a squat, which is in a vertical plane, and then you add a band around your knees, that's putting resistance on a lateral point of view. So like from your glute med and your hip abduction, while also working in that vertical plane. So it's really important when you're doing your glute workouts that you're incorporating all of these kinds of movements. There's not one movement that is superior to the other. They all play a part in building the perfect rounded perky glutes. So I hear a lot of people talking about like, oh, squats aren't good for growing your booty, do hip thrusts instead, because squats are predominantly a quad exercise. Yes, that's true. Squats are predominantly a quad exercise, but you can manipulate your stance and everything to help hit your glutes out a little bit more. I love squats. I actually don't like hip thrusts. Whenever I do hip thrusts, I get like a sore back from leaning on like a bench. Even though I put like a mat there, I get a sore hip from the bar, even though I have like padding there. It feels awkward. It feels awkward to get in and out of for me. I don't get much of like a glute burn or anything like that. I mean, you don't always need to be getting a burn, but I don't really like hip thrusts that much. I still do them because I know that it's important to hit my glutes from all different angles, but I feel them even more when I use a band, for example. So it's just important to understand that all these different movements tied in together is what's going to grow and develop and shape your glutes. Don't just stick to one thing, one exercise. Another thing is, I see on Instagram a lot, all these, say, Instagram girls doing crazy exercises that I would never even bother with. It really comes down to personal preference. For me, I know what works for me, and I've also done a lot of research myself, so I don't really bother doing exercises that are just kind of like fancy Instagram exercises. Every now and then, if I'm sort of just wanting to have a day where I mix it up a little bit and just have a little bit of fun in the gym or whatever, then I might do something a little bit different. You know, like say the glute push down on like the assisted pull-up machine, that kind of thing. Like that would not be a staple in my glute workouts. That might be something that I might just throw in every now and then just to change things up a little bit if I'm getting a little bit bored, or if I'm just maybe, I don't know, trying something new and whatever, but it's definitely not going to be a staple. Your staple movements should be your squat, hip thrust, deadlift, and abduction movements, because they are your compound lifts that are going to burn a lot of calories whilst engaging a lot of muscle and also really using your glutes. And then your abduction movements, obviously, because they're just as important to building your whole glutes as a whole and preventing like imbalance and stuff like that. Tip number 9 is different muscle fibers. So we have what's called fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers all throughout our body. Some people are more predominantly made up of one or the other, but usually most, like all of us, will have a combination of both. Your glutes are going to benefit from being hit in 2 different ways. So you want to hit the fast twitch and slow twitch muscle fibers. So I will do, say for example, when I do my squats, I'll do only say 5 reps at a really heavy weight, and that's like a really slow movement, really slow reps and heavy and low reps and slow eccentric. But then I might do, say, that's on like my heavier day or whatever, and then like through a later day in the week I might do squats again, but banded or with a kettlebell or something, and I'll do like 15 reps with a light weight and faster reps. So my point is, you can do the same exercise even, but hitting it from different ways. So like I said, the squat I find is super important for growing your glutes. I've had a lot of benefit from doing that. Everyone's different. Some people might not feel like they get a lot of benefit from doing squats, and that's fine. But even with a hip thrust, you can do a really heavy hip thrust with you might just do 3 reps at a really heavy weight, and really like fatigue your muscles from that. Later in the week or the next week, you might do hip thrust again, but you'll add a band, lower the weight, and rep it out to 15 reps and get a really good glute burn and be all sweaty. My point is, there's different ways to train. You don't have to just keep it to one way. I believe incorporating everything is going to be the best way to grow and shape your glutes. So Don't just stick to one rep range. Don't just stick to one weight. Don't just stick to one exercise. Incorporate it all, especially at the beginning when you're trying to figure out what works best for you. And yeah, try different things. Tip number 10 is progressive overload. So you want to be progressively increasing the load every week or every session. This can be super small increases, but it just means that you're not sitting at one comfortable weight or letting your body plateau. You're constantly challenging yourself, adding more weight or adding more reps or adding a band, adding more frequency or slowing everything down so that your eccentric phase is a lot slower, which means you're creating more time under tension, which means you're tearing the muscle fibers even more or adding even more volume. I could go on, like it's there's so many different ways to progressively overload, but it is a super important part of training as a whole. Don't just be sitting in the same comfortable place every week, every time you come to the gym, and then be like, oh, I'm not seeing any results. You need to be constantly progressing, and that's why we call it progressive overload, because you're progressing every week and overloading your body or your muscles to help them grow. It is important to understand though that if you're progressively overloading, you might get to a point where you need to then have a deload, which might mean a week off training where, I mean, you still train, but you drop your weight right back, or you might keep it at the same weight but do less reps or less volume or something to give your body that little bit of a break, and then the next week you kind of continue on from there. So gets a little bit more technical with this kind of stuff, but just try to remember to increase the weight or the reps or something each week. So if you were able to do 5 reps of a certain weight last week, then the next week you might try and do 6 reps of that weight for 3 sets, or you might stick to your 5 reps, but you might just add like a 1.25 kilo plate on each side of the bar, and then that's a 2.5 kilo increase from last week, and you might still be able to do 5 reps on that weight. So just constantly pushing yourself to progress. So I think that is the sort of basic 10 tips that I wanted to talk about. There's so much more that I could go into with this kind of stuff, but I do think that that is sort of like the main areas of what you should be including to really grow your glutes. Just quickly, there are what we call like the glutes in the stretch position. So when you're in, your glutes are in a stretch position, that is say like the bottom of a squat, or if you're doing walking lunges, for example, you're putting your glutes in that stretch position, as opposed to doing a hip thrust where you're like this. Your glutes aren't stretched. I don't know if that makes sense, but I don't really know how to explain it. But so if you're doing a squat, you're in this vertical position, but as you come down, your glutes, you're like this. That's your bum, and your knees come forward. Okay, so that's your bum. So the muscle here on your glutes is stretching, whereas if you're in a hip thrust and you're doing that, your glutes aren't stretching. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's another reason why it's important to hit different movements, because according to research, your glutes get more sore being in a stretched position. So some people say, oh, I don't really get sore from doing hip thrusts or whatever. I don't really get sore from doing hip thrusts, but if I go really heavy on squats, my glutes will get sore. That can be one reason as well. So making sure that you're hitting your glutes in different styles, different types of training, different positions, different planes of movement, all that kind of stuff, just super important to really hit your glutes from every way that you can in order for them to grow and shape the way that you want them to. I think with your glutes as well, like I love Instagram for sharing knowledge, and you know, you can go onto Instagram and not really know what you're going to do at the gym that day, but see a workout video pop up on your screen and think, oh, I'll try that, and it works really well. Like, I love Instagram for that. But just remember not to get too fancy. Don't overcomplicate things. As long as you're hitting your glutes from different exercises, different rep ranges, different weights, that will grow. Just try to stick to your more basic movements. Your basic movements are there for a reason. they don't need to be neglected for you to then only perform these fancy Instagram exercises. Sticking to those basic movements and doing them in a variety of different ways is what's going to get you the best results. And not only that, doing those compound movements, big movements like your squat and your deadlift, making sure you're doing them with the best form that you possibly can, of course, but they're going to be burning fat while building muscles. So that's even more reason for you to want to stick to them, especially if you are increasing your food a little bit, maybe to be able to build your glutes. You want to be, you want to be eating enough food, but then you might be a bit worried about gaining body fat or whatever, which is completely fine. There's more to you than your body fat or how you look. But doing those compound movements is going to help you burn fat whilst building muscle and getting fucking strong at the same time. So don't look past those basic movements. They are there for a reason, and that is where I've got most of my results from as well. On that note, I have written an ebook, which is a gym-based guide to building your glutes, which is a written format of everything that I've just gone over. It isn't available for sale just yet. It will be soon. If you did want to grab a copy of that, DM me and I'll give you the information. But I will be selling that soon for you all, so stay tuned. And don't forget to stay updated with my Instagram. I will always be posting tips and tricks about growing your glutes and different exercises and gym advice and life advice, everything about that kind of stuff. So Instagram is the place to best contact me and where I share most of my knowledge. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, leave a comment, and I'll see you all in the next one.